Welcome everybody for this afternoon session. My name is Volker Wulff, and I'm very proudly capable of presenting you really 4 excellent papers, which are also in many ways intertwined with each other. And the first paper in this session looks at a very interesting case, and a case I think which our community needs to explore more upon, the way how research results can become relevant to practice, and in this case can become a product. And I'm very happy to have Parmit, Chilana, Andy Coe, and Jacob Wobbrock presenting this piece of work. And the piece of paper has also become gained a honorable mention, and congratulations to that. And Parmit Chilana will present the paper, please. Whoops. Whoops. Please. Yeah. Please.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm Parmit Chilana. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo, and I'm presenting work that I did in collaboration with, oops, keep moving this, Andy Coe and Jake Wobbrock, who are both professors at UW. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today, but they send you their best wishes. So in HCI, as a community, we invent hundreds of novel technology innovations every year. And we've been doing this at SIGCHI alone for over 33 years now. And we all know that getting a paper about a technology innovation, getting accepted at places like SIGCHI or WIST, it's not an easy feat. We have to convince reviewers of a very detailed criteria, and among several things, generally we have to convince them of 2 things. One is generally, how novel your innovation is, and the second one, to some extent, is, does it demonstrate good science? Now, we had a number of debates in our community about this criteria, and a number of questions have been raised, and one of the things that often comes up is, given our emphasis on novelty and good science, how do we actually assess the eventual success, the impact, or the potential transferability of that innovation? And if we could do that, is there some way that we could see more innovations actually transfer into something in the real world? Because we've had a number of people who've raised this question that, so many of our HCI innovations, even though they're great, they're forward-looking, they actually rarely appear in the real world. We had a panel about this yesterday that I moderated. We had a really engaging discussion on what are some of the challenges and opportunities in taking our research innovations and doing technology transfer. And one of the things that we all sort of tended to agree on was that, yes, there is a lot of great work happening in the field, and there is perhaps transfer also happening, but compared to other subfields of computer science or biomedicine, we don't actually have enough examples that we can concretely point to, or case studies or formal discussions that really chart out, okay, what is it really like to do a tech transfer process for an HCI innovation? So our focus in this paper really was to sort of address this gap and answer this question: what does it take for an HCI research innovation to transition from purely an academic endeavor to a commercial product that has real customers and generates revenue? Now, as we discussed in the panel yesterday, there are potentially hundreds of avenues for us to do transfer. For example, you could license your innovation to other entities. You could make your tool available through app stores if that's something that's feasible. You could also, if you're working in an industry lab, perhaps you can work with your local product teams or tech transfer teams, to do transfer in that way. Or, you could start a new business. And that's kind of what our story is about. How do you take an innovation from a university research project and build a startup business around it from scratch? And in doing this, we tackle sort of some unique challenges because unlike other kinds of tools that exist out there that customers can just download or can buy from you, we were pursuing a venture with our innovation that required a business-to-business model. So this means that the customer here was not, the end users were not the customers of the product that we were building. So before an end user could actually benefit from the innovation, we required a business entity to first adopt the innovation. And that's where we ran into some interesting things and challenges that I'm going to discuss with you today. So before getting further into it, I want to discuss a little bit what this actual innovation is. So the innovation originated in my dissertation work when I was a student at the University of Washington. It's called Lemonade. It's a novel selection-based crowdsourced contextual help tool for web applications. I presented this work before at CHI, so I won't repeat all the details, but just to show you quickly, the idea here was that users could find relevant help from other users within the context of the application by simply making a few selections in the user interface. So this meant that, we reduced the burden that they faced in terms of searching online and putting in queries, or, wading through many different discussion forums, or even calling for help or emailing for support. So we were able to show that users could, if this type of help was available, they could get their answer question mostly in the top 2 results. Now, in the spirit of doing good science in HCI, we try to follow a nice user-centered process where we did a bunch of formative studies. We did mechanical Turk studies to assess our retrieval with real users, and we also did extensive real-world deployments. So in this process, our prototype was exposed to over 40,000 users, and we learned many different things at each of these stages, over the 2-3 years on which we worked on this. So some of our promising findings and insights included, after a few years, we realized we were actually solving a real problem for which there was a real need, and that our solution was fairly feasible. We also found that our retrieval algorithm was effective at retrieving relevant question and answers using just the UI selections alone. And we found that it was fairly easy to integrate Lemonade with other sites because of the way I developed the algorithm. All you needed to do was just integrate a couple of lines of code, and you could make Lemonade functional on any website. And our main finding in terms of from user surveys and actual log data was that over 70% of users found something helpful. And they actually wanted to come back and reuse the help system. And this was really in sharp contrast to other kinds of help systems that are out there that easily get abandoned, and certainly users don't ever want to go back. So, we were hitting on some key things here, and we got publications, and it was great for my dissertation. Now, we had a lot of discussions amongst us as co-authors. We're like, okay, should we just stop here and move on to the next thing? That's what happens to the majority of research that we do. Or can we actually do something to take it forward? Because we know that there are millions of websites out there, there are millions of users who experience frustration with something to do with web applications every day and could really benefit from this approach that we developed in Lemonade. But the question really was, how do we make this innovation more widely available to end users? Now, at the time we were having this discussion, at our university at UW, there was a lot of momentum around commercialization and startups, and particularly our Center for Commercialization was very supportive in terms of, giving research projects a chance to really take off. So they provided us some initial seed funding. They gave us access to expertise in terms of local entrepreneurs. They offered us incubator space. And then eventually we got some venture funding and started to doing our own team building and fundraising on our own. So at that point, I was near graduation and I had a faculty job lined up. So I wasn't too keen on pursuing this full time. But my advisors, had the right timing. They were post-tenure. So Jake Wobbrock became the CEO and Andy Ko became the CTO. And they've been on leave now for 2.5 years at UW. And they've been pursuing this full time to see, how far they can take this. So as we were sort of in our startup fundraising and team building phase, we realized, we were really stepping into the real world now. Yes, we did real world deployments and field deployments, and we learned a lot of things. But when you're talking to real businesses and customers and issues involving money, it's a whole different game that we as researchers are not really exposed to. And one of the first questions that we were tackling, and to some extent we still are tackling this right now, may not be that surprising if you've ever done a startup or your own business. You have to really define what exactly is the product. And it's not just a matter of taking your research prototype and making it more robust, but for example, in our case, it was answering this question: what would have to be added to Lemonade as a research prototype for it to become a sellable product? And like I mentioned before, even though our main research benefit that we found was for end users to make selections and find help really fast, unfortunately, in the real world, end users are not the ones who get to decide what kind of help an application offers. That's purely a business decision that's made by the creators of the application. So we had to sort of switch our focus and figure out, okay, how do we provide some other clear value to the business integrating the tool on their application, so that, can we provide them some other business value so that they would make this work for their end users and help out end users find help. So to do this, we had to work with several trial customers and initial adopters. We had to go knock on many different doors, to get them to see, would they be willing to adopt this in their product or in their application, and what kind of value propositions could be assessed based on this initial adoption. So we started seeing some interesting results with our initial first few trials. For example, one company, Red Awning, that was using it for this an online booking site for vacation rentals. Within a few weeks, when they integrated AnswerDash, they started to see 31% increase in their online bookings. Similarly, another company saw a 50% reduction in their support tickets, and another company, they were actually saving time in terms of ticket resolutions after deploying Lemonade. So, AnswerDash, sorry. So then we tried to quantify these three potential propositions, and then these became part of our marketing story. And, we wanted to be more concrete with it, so we started saying, okay, by deploying AnswerDash, you can potentially increase sales. If you're a transactional website, you'll see a reduction in your customer support cost. And then we also tried to provide some additional analytics about user behavior and Q&A activity that, these companies couldn't really get from the standard commercial tools. But despite having these, promising propositions, we kept running into one major roadblock. And that was that, we weren't dealing with a single person in a business entity. And it actually consisted of many different stakeholders, who had to sort of approve the integration of any kind of innovation, right? In our case, it was a help tool that's visible on the site. It has to really integrate with the application. So we were dealing with the director of customer experience, the e-commerce director, the head of support, the support staff who are actually on the front lines of answering users' questions, all the way to the interaction designers who control the look and feel. So all of these stakeholders viewed AnswerDash very differently and sometimes even had competing interests. So our struggle really became about figuring out how do we satisfy each of these different stakeholders given their different needs. So what we describe in the paper is how we had to really shift from our user-centered approach that we were using in our research to really an adoption-centered design perspective. And we describe this as this process of understanding and designing for product adopters and stakeholders who are just beyond your end users. So these are things that we don't consider as part of the research process necessarily, when we're thinking about our research contributions, but they're critical to actually marketing the product and selling the product. Now, there are several examples of adoption-centered design decisions that we made, but I'll share only a couple of them with you. For example, one of the things we had to do was figure out what were some of the current help and support tools that businesses were using, and how can AnswerDash be integrated with some of these features? Because customers were hesitant to replace their existing help services, but they were more willing to sort of try them on as add-ons. Similarly, we built in some tools for them to moderate and configure how AnswerDash integrated with their site so they could control colors and what kind of content that appeared. And we also developed more analytics that showed the measurable business value. This is the exact amount of money you saved, or this is the exact amount of time that you saved by integrating AnswerDash. So in terms of where we are now, we now have 13 staff members who are dedicated in terms of marketing, sales, business development, and engineering. And we've had over 50 plus trial and paying customers, but we're still trying to build this customer base. And we're constantly learning about new stakeholders with every customer that we interact with. And our adoption-centered design decisions still keep iterating. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. So one question that we get asked usually is, did we actually succeed in making our innovation more widely available to end users? So after 5+ years of research and startup and business development, I would say this is still a very difficult question to answer. Maybe we're halfway, maybe we're only 25% of the way. It might be we only last a few more months, or it might be, we get more funding and then we have another 5-10 year cycle. It's really hard to say. And that's one of the things, that if you're going to be a researcher going this path, you have to realize there may not be a clear exit strategy. In popular media, you see things like Instagram or WhatsApp, but this is not really the way startups really work. 99% of them actually failed. So you have to be sort of ready for that long-term commitment. And building a sustainable business out of an HCI innovation is actually a very different thing as well. This is a quote from our CEO, Jake, who says, an HCI-based tech startup compared to HCI research is not concerned with deep innovation. That has to already exist. It's more concerned with improving that innovation and taking it from a research project to a sellable product, and then eventually to a sustainable business. So AnswerDash has achieved stage 2, but not yet stage 3. So, why are we presenting this at SIGCHI, and what are some of the things that we can think about as a community? First of all, there's increased pressure on universities and industry research labs to demonstrate transferability and impact, right? But we have to sort of, explain to our colleagues or our employers that this type of work requires long-term commitment, resources, connections, and business skills, and it requires us to sometimes even pause our research, right, if we're going to make a full-time commitment towards this. And it can also be a matter of your personal choice and ethical stance, whether or not you actually want to engage in something commercial. Also, for certain kinds of innovations, knowledge about its potential adoption can actually be just as important as addressing the user-centered design concern. That's sort of the main theme that's come out of our paper. It may not be surprising to some of you who've done startups or engaged in other kind of business ventures, but as HCI technology researchers, we certainly don't think about this or consider this as part of our research contribution. Now, does this mean that we should investigate adoption-centered concern as part of technology research? Should this be our criteria for CHI papers or WISP papers? We certainly have methods that we can borrow from practitioners or from other researchers, things like participatory design that have specifically been designed, to extract findings from stakeholders. But, at the same time, I'm sure some of you are thinking, it'll probably change the kinds of problems we tackle as a research community, right? It'll potentially make us more risk averse. We might only shoot for short-term solutions that can be easily adapted and, monetized instead of tackling some of the bigger problems that might take a few more years. Finally, there's a thought that Christensen has developed, for a long time in terms of disruptive innovations. They are going to take a long time to transfer. There is no immediate transfer if your innovation is truly disruptive, right? So in that case, we can just kind of leave it up to somebody else to disseminate our ideas maybe 10 years from now or 20 years from now. So are we ready to do that? A lot of researchers have this stance, and to some extent that's my personal stance too. Why should I waste my time? I want to work on the next fun research problem instead of, taking something to market. But, what if you're working with a web-based technology or a mobile technology, where the innovation cycle is much shorter? Then what are you supposed to do? Like, should you just leave it? We don't unfortunately have answers to these questions, but our paper does raise some of these things that I think it's important for us to consider. And so our panel, provided a nice first step in this discussion, but we hope, this opens up more ways for community to answer some of these questions and at least to start a dialogue. What is the future of technology transfer and HCI? And it would be really great to, for others of you who have done this, to share your stories so we can all learn from each other. Thank you.
And I have to apologize. I made a small mistake when I introduced you. It's not the honorable mention, but the best paper award you won. 1% of the papers only got it. So congratulations again, and it's a really interesting topic, and we are open for maybe 2-3 questions, please.
Hi, I'm Sean Sorahan from Rowley. So I'm doing an engineering doctorate where I work for 4 years for a company while doing research and defend a thesis at the end of it. And I often find that the biggest struggle I have is going between industrial work and development and research and publications, and fighting with my company, fighting with my supervisors to see which gets more priority. And along with that, I've found that the development I do at the company has been a lot more robust than the development I ever did at university. I was just wondering if you thought there was any merit in thinking about adoption-centered design in university courses and while teaching research development. And there's always going to be a place for blue sky thinking, but I think there should be more focus on whether this can actually impact in the real world and be adopted.
Yeah, certainly. I think, especially, I guess in HCI or maybe prototyping classes, we kind of teach people, okay, quickly get your ideas out and don't worry about the engineering details. But at least in our experience, we found that those little engineering details sometimes can mean a big thing for a company or for a customer, right? So everything sort of has to be perfect if you're going to go forward with something. So I think including that as part of the pedagogy is very useful.